Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Tomorrow, we have the European Union Summit, and I think it's fair to say this is, certainly from a UK perspective, the biggest summit for many, many years. Boris Johnson heading off there tomorrow. There'll be a dinner tomorrow night. We'd expect a late night announcement, and they may even, and I've seen this before with EU summits, they may even go through into the wee hours of the morning. All of this, of course, ahead of Parliament sitting for the first time since the Falklands War on Saturday. The Prime Minister, in my view, really very, very keen indeed to bring back something, to present it to the House of Commons and to try and sell it as a new deal. So that even if it does get voted down, he's able to say, now look, I promised you we'd leave on the 31st of October, but through the Benn Act and through Parliament itself, I've been blocked. It's not my fault, Governor. No, it was me doing my best to get us to leave and Parliament that stopped us. But there's no guarantee, absolutely no guarantee, that he will get anything in Brussels that is acceptable, or indeed anything in Brussels that even looks very different to the same deal that Mrs May put before the House of Commons and had rejected 3 times. Sorry, wash my mouth out with soap and water. It's not a deal, it's a treaty. And Mr Varadkar keeps talking about the treaty. Indeed, Michel Barnier says one of the difficulties with this is we're looking at changing a treaty, and that takes time. So there is a possibility there could even be, an agreement in principle with the acceptance that there's an extension to Christmas to try and finalise the deal. And that would mean Parliament on Saturday wouldn't have an actual vote on the substance, but it would be an indicative vote on the direction. I mean, all outcomes, I guess, here are possible. We know there's a fair degree of Brexit weariness in the country, and I'm going to ask you tonight to tell me what would be your ideal outcome tomorrow. And if you're egging Boris on to go for a new treaty, then call me. Tell me why on 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think, do you know what? The best thing is if Boris got up and walked out and left an empty chair in the way that de Gaulle did many years ago with the European Economic Community. If that's what you're looking for, text to 84850. Or maybe you think, actually, do you know what? He just needs to comply with the Benn Act and extend, and to buy some more time. If that's what you want to see happen, please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, those of you watching us on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube, you can comment too. Now, speaking through an interpreter, earlier on today, we heard the European Council President Donald Tusk saying he would have bet on a deal 24 hours ago, but now there are doubts from the British side. Let's have a listen.
Currently,
the negotiations are still ongoing. I was really hoping we would have a ready negotiated legal text by now, by midday today to be precise, so that the other EU partners could familiarise themselves with the details of the agreement. Everything is going in the right direction, but as you have probably noticed with Brexit and with our British partners, everything is possible. It's seething in there. The most basic details of this agreement are ready, and realistically we could get this deal over the line as soon as tomorrow to avoid chaos and other unfortunate events related to uncontrolled and chaotic exit. Yesterday I wanted to bet the deal had been polished and ready. Today some difficulties occurred from the British side.
Hey-ho.
Over there, the situation in Parliament is very complicated.
And there, of course, he's talking about the balancing act that Boris Johnson is trying to do between pleasing the Irish Taoiseach and pleasing the DUP. And goodness me, that is not an easy one to keep both of those balls up in the air at the same time. It really is not. Look, the truth of it, folks, is, and in a sense, Donald Tusk said it there, that we do not have a legal text. So anybody that is speculating on this doesn't actually know what is going to be presented. The only way that I comment on this is I know what Boris Johnson asked for, and we'll have to see whether those demands from Johnson actually get met. But the truth of it is, no one really knows what's going on. Now, that is the absolute truth of it. Even the Cabinet, which met this afternoon, were not given any legal text. So we are in the realms here of pretty wild speculation. All I would say is when I hear positive noises coming out of EU leaders, I think to myself, if they think it's good, I very much doubt when I see it that I'll think it's good, or indeed many Leave voters. So look, I want to ask you, you tell me, what is your ideal outcome for the events, the dramatic events perhaps, of the EU summit in Brussels tomorrow night? And let's ask James in Manchester. James, what would you like to see?
Oh, good evening,
Good
Nigel.
evening.
Well, Nigel, before I get on to that, can I just ask you one question?
No, absolutely not, James.
No. What I mean is, no, hear me out, please.
No, I don't want to, James. I'm really getting bored with people using this show to ring me in as if it's some sort of... I mean, this is not Mastermind. I'm not sitting here with EU treaties as my specialist subject, am I?
Well, what I'm saying, Nigel, I'm on your side. I'm with the Brexit Party.
I don't doubt it, James.
What I'm trying to say is, we all know that this deal is just swapping one treaty for another. And I am hearing some horrific stories on the news today that our country is going to be locked into a mechanism where we cannot even compete with the EU.
Okay.
Our taxes can't be lowered, our corporation taxes can't be lowered. And the only reason the question I was going to ask, Nigel, was because there's only you that'll answer me honestly.
You don't give up, James, do you? But go on.
Because you're the only person in politics that answers honestly. Is there in this new treaty any mechanism whatsoever that if in future years and future governments it doesn't work, we can get out of it like Article 50? Because from what I'm hearing, there's no
James, we haven't seen the league. We haven't seen... James, we haven't seen...
We are stuck in it forever.
So, James, would you like Boris Johnson to reject this treaty tomorrow in the summit?
I want no deal, Nigel.
Thank you. James, you've answered the question. That's great. Now I can...
of the referendum in 26.
Now that you've said that, I can then have a conversation with you. All right? So, at least as a member of the European Union, under the Lisbon Treaty, we had Article 50.
Precisely.
A method and a mechanism through which we can leave. The new treaty that we're signing up to doesn't have a specific exit mechanism. What it has is a political declaration that is
which is worthless.
Which is, well, it's supposed to be an aspiration for the future. But the truth of it, James, is they don't have to give us diddly squat over the course of the next few years. And that is why I am so opposed to it. James, thanks for your call. I'm going to run on and speak to Frank, who comes from Leyland in the Netherlands. Good evening, Frank.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe good evening, Nigel. It's actually Lelystad. It's the newest town in the whole of the Netherlands.
Is it?
From a long time ago.
Well, no wonder
not so long ago.
Well, my Dutch pronunciation is very poor, Frank, but forgive me for that. So, what do you want to see happen tomorrow?
Well, I think personally an extension, Nigel, would be the best outcome, simply because this is being rushed through, and I think it's been rushed through by the Conservative government in a desperate attempt to not to lose face because of this 31st of October deadline. They must have felt very confident that they would succeed in doing it in such a short time frame, but of course they haven't taken on board the DUP, and I have a feeling the DUP might still rock the boat before the end of all this.
Just an observation, Frank.
This evening.
Just an observation, Frank.
Yes.
You talk about it being rushed through. It's been 3.5 years.
Yeah, this final phase of it, or we'd like to believe is the final phase of it, has been rushed through, though, hasn't it, Nigel? I mean, this deadline, I mean, Theresa May, what was it, 108 times she said, March the 29th, we will be leaving
and how many times has Boris said the 31st of October? About 5,000?
I would say it's at least double, at the very, very least.
Frank, let me say this to you, and we did talk about this last night. Anybody that thinks that we're nearing the final phase of this hasn't got a clue, because if we do sign up to this new treaty, then that is just the beginning. We will have done the easy bit. The withdrawal agreement will prove to have been the easy bit. The hard bit will be being subject to their rules and their judgments, negotiating the rest of it. Frank, when you say an extension, I mean, how many more times are the public supposed to put up with a can being kicked down the road?
Well, it's a good point. You know, it's gone on for so long, it seems like a never-ending story, doesn't it? But in the context of this revised plan that Boris Johnson has had, that we're going to get it done by the 31st of October. My sentiments are that it's rushed through in a mad panic just to save face. And the reality of the situation is you won't save face doing it this way. He could actually lose if he goes into a general election and doesn't hit the deadline, which looks actually virtually impossible now. I think you'd probably agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things, Frank, that could happen is they could come to a sort of heads of agreement tomorrow night, and there'd be an extension with more negotiations, and that would then mean that the vote in Parliament on Saturday would be an indicative vote. It may well happen. Frank, thank you for the call. David is a new caller from Northampton. Good evening, David.
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening. So, what do you want to see happen?
Yeah, well, I'm only catching up on the news today. Just as I was driving home, I've just pulled over now. But I'd like to see agreement. I think the whole country's weary now of Brexit, and it really is time we put this to bed. And I'm glad in many ways Boris has taken a very hard line on this to get this done by the 31st of October. And provided that he hasn't given too many concessions, and that's the bit we don't know until it's revealed, provided he's got the ability to allow us to move towards a free trade with other countries so that we can take control of our own laws and control our own borders, then I think that would be a good outcome for us. Those are still the three tests for me. And if we've got those and we can get a deal through, then I think that would fit the majority of the people in the country.
And what if he has made too many concessions? What if, David, what he presents to the House of Commons is effectively withdrawal agreement Mark IV?
Well, look, I hope, and I don't. I think we're being a bit harsh on him. Let's judge him when that comes out. I hope, in all the words he's used going into it, that he wouldn't. All the ERG members seem to be on side. I don't think they would accept that, Nigel. So they're all,
David,
they're all talking positive about it. So let's hope that he hasn't conceded.
All right, okay. No, David makes the point that he hopes Boris gets a good deal. We all hope Boris gets a good deal. I'm just not sure one's actually on offer. But hey, that's my view. Tell me what you think. 0345 6060 973. This is the Nigel Farage Show. It's 6:15 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz.
As intensive Brexit talks continue in Brussels, Boris Johnson's held meetings with his cabinet and the Backbench 1922 committee ahead of seeing the Democratic Unionists. Downing Street's confirmed a motion will be tabled later for Parliament to sit on Saturday.
An absolutely crucial EU summit tomorrow. I'm not just saying that, it really is. And of course, no legal text for us to examine. Not even the Cabinet have seen a legal text. Acres of speculation. Well, to bring us up to speed with the latest developments and rumours is Matthew Thompson, LBC senior reporter. Matthew, what news from the front in Brussels?
I think rumours is the right word, Nigel, because what we have to establish here is that no one really knows until we see what it's down in black and white. It is all a little bit speculation. But having said that, fairly solid noises now coming out of Europe from several sources saying that it looks like the bones are there of something. That means that there's agreement on some of the most contentious issues. Customs, for example, which is a huge one, particularly for the DUP. The level playing field, this idea that we might abandon the Theresa May commitments to stay, workers' rights, environmental regulations, all that sort of thing.
Basically single market rules.
Exactly. Well, that's one way of putting it, yes, exactly.
Yeah, it is.
Shadowing single market rules or thereabouts, that there's an agreement on that there's an agreement on I think I said customs, but the one issue on which there isn't agreement yet is on VAT. And now there's this suggestion that in order to facilitate cross-border trade in Ireland, between Northern Ireland and the Republic, that Northern Ireland would stay within the EU's VAT regime. That would therefore have to create a VAT border in the Irish Sea, as well as now the agreement on a regulatory border and indeed potentially a customs border. So if the agreement is there on all those things, and the likes of Emmanuel Macron are now coming out and saying that they believe that the deal is being, in his words, finalised, then those are optimistic noises. However, how does the
DUP square the circle of the French president being pleased?
However, all of this still depends, in terms of it getting through the UK Parliament, on the support of the DUP and the ERG. Now, in that regard, a very interesting quote, not from one of my sources, but from the source of Sean O'Neill, a fellow Northern Irishman, but he's the chief reporter at The Times. Apologies if you're offended by this, but I do think it sums up exactly where we are. Sean O'Neill tweets, "My Downing Street source just texted me to say that he's in Robert Dias, a well-known hardware store, buying turd polish."
So
that says a lot.
Yeah, well, so it does say that actually, really, it's going to be very similar to what Mrs May put to the House of Commons 3 times.
And whether or not it has moved enough to satisfy the DUP is still an open question. Signs that much of the hold-up today and delays to meetings of the EU ambassadors that Michel Barnier was supposed to be addressing, suggestions that that's because of a hold-up on the DUP side and trying to bring them along with them. But it's not just the DUP that will be important, Nigel. It is also potentially Labour votes that will be needed to get this deal over the line, if indeed there is a deal to be voted on. As you said at the beginning, it may not be that there's a deal to be voted on Saturday.
It could be
may
indicative,
talk about indicative votes. But nonetheless, to get through, it is likely that we will need some Labour rebels. There are certain Labour, the numbers are unsure. Some people say 17, some people say less than that. There are Labour MPs who are at least minded to vote for a deal. Much then depends on the Labour Party's attitude to those people. Now, I had the good fortune to be able to interview Mr Jeremy Corbyn this morning in Watford. And I began by asking him whether or not, even though it is Labour's position to oppose a Boris Johnson deal, Labour MPs who were minded to do so, the likes of Gareth Snell, perhaps Stephen Kinnock, these Labour MPs for a deal, could they vote for a Boris Johnson deal without fear of consequences?
I will examine the deal if and when it comes back, and it's very strange that the Prime Minister hasn't bothered to go to Parliament today to explain what he's trying to achieve from the European Union, because there is a Council of Ministers meeting tomorrow. I think we should be told before he goes there what his policy actually is. What I've heard fills me with alarm, because it creates a border down the Irish Sea, because it undermines the Good Friday Agreement, because it gives no protection on consumer rights or workers' rights or environmental protections, and doesn't guarantee us that trade access to Europe, which is so essential.
No.
A very long list of criticisms there.
Indeed, but not quite an answer to the question.
No.
Which is why I pushed him further, and I asked him, given that answer, whether he would remove the whip from Labour MPs that voted for a Boris Johnson deal.
I will try to persuade Labour MPs, all of them, to support the party's position on this, which is to prevent a no-deal exit and is to.
But if they don't, will you punish them? Will there be consequences?
I don't go through life threatening people. I go through life trying to persuade people, and I will ask them to recognise the decision we took.
But if you fail to persuade them,
why are all the media so obsessed with punishment all the time?
Persuasion is an option, but presumably that might fail, and if it fails, I'm wondering, is there consequences if you fail to persuade?
Persuasion is more powerful than punishment, and I will talk to Labour MPs, ask them to vote along with the party, as I would ask other people to recognise the dangers of what Boris Johnson is proposing. This is a danger of crashing out, where we lose our rights and lose our access to trade.
You don't rule out losing the whip.
You're obsessed with this, aren't you?
I'm just interested.
No,
because
you're not interested.
Persuasion, it's perfectly possible, Mr. Corbyn, that you're a very persuasive man, but persuasion might fail. And so I'm simply wondering that if you fail to persuade them, what's the consequence?
I will ask Labour MPs to recognise that the party came to a decision at our party conference after a lot of debate as to how we'd approach Brexit. The whole party united around that, and I would ask them all to respect that and respect the importance of getting a message across of protecting jobs all across the UK, protecting that trade relationship with Europe, and not crashing out into the arms of Donald Trump and some kind of free trade deal with the USA, which will be very damaging.
This persuasion, Matthew, if it's not Jeremy Corbyn doing the persuasion, could it be his friends in Momentum perhaps doing at branch level some of the persuasion?
It's certainly possible. Oh, actually, having done that interview this morning, I was in Westminster earlier today, and I was speaking to a couple of MPs, one of whom pointed out to me that actually, in some ways, the threat of deselection renders threats of losing the whip redundant, because if there are certain MPs who are already thinking that they might be deselected, then they're going to more likely to be gung-ho anyway and vote for a deal if they believe there is indeed a deal there to be voted for. And actually, in fact, it may come down to persuasion. But if we are in the business of persuading Labour MPs not to vote for the deal, it's arguable that to say, please don't help Boris Johnson out, and don't allow Boris Johnson to then go to the country saying that I have, after 3.5 years, solved the Brexit problem, I have kept my promises, etc., etc. There are those very good pollsters, the likes of James Kangasoriam, who is well trusted on these things, who thinks that that would set in his words, an Exocet missile to Labour's seats in the Midlands and the North if they can allow Boris Johnson to go out trumpeting his success. So that might prove a powerful dissuading argument
very interesting.
if you're Jeremy Corbyn trying to get
interesting.
Labour MPs not to back Boris Johnson.
No, and well done for getting the interview with Jeremy Corbyn. That's good going. Matthew, thank you very much indeed. And some updated news on Sky. The French President Emmanuel Macron says he hopes a Brexit deal can be agreed in the next few hours. So we've got our real friends like President Macron being optimistic about amending this treaty, and I wonder whether that really is going to work with public opinion and indeed with Parliament. Andrea on Facebook will be delighted. She says, yes, there are several scenarios possible. I'm sure Boris knows them all and more. Well, I'm sure he's wargamed them all, but does he really know what's going to be agreed tomorrow night? We'll see. Richard is a new caller in Bromley. Good evening, Richard.
Hello there.
So what would you like to see happen at this summit, Richard?
Well, I'd like to see, firstly, us get a deal, obviously a deal which suits the British United Kingdom, but I can't see that happening, and so I can't actually see anything progressing here. What I don't want is us to, as you say, kick the can down the road, but I don't see how Boris can get out of it because he's legally binded to extend. But what I would like is us to get a free trade deal like 36 other countries in the world have with Europe. I'd like to deal with Europe very closely and build a good relationship with them, but not in this EU. And the biggest concern I've got is in 2025, the EU starting their own army. And I've got two younger children that when they get older, they will get conscripted into the European army. And I don't think there's enough said about this.
Nobody in Brussels has publicly talked about conscription, but what they are talking about in a very gung-ho way is building a European army and using it, Richard, which I find a little bit concerning. Richard, thank you very much indeed. And I agree with Richard. Perfectly happy with trade agreement, perfectly happy with tariff-free, quota-free, not happy with the single market, the customs union and the European Court of Justice, let alone open borders and not having our fisheries. I thought that's what we voted for nearly 3.5 years ago. Christine says Corbyn will reject the treaty and then hopefully we can have a general election. Well, that, Christine, is only if he allows his MPs to vote for a general election. And a lot of his own MPs are very scared that a general election means they lose their seats. So none of this is straightforward. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:30 in time for the news. with Lisa Aziz.
Boris Johnson's addressed his cabinet and backbench Conservative MPs as intense Brexit negotiations continue in Brussels. But the European Council President Donald Tusk suggested a deal is looking less likely now than it was 24 hours ago.
At this stage, it's indicative. Before I go back to that, a good news story. Now, Extension Rebellion are really getting my goat. I was told the police were taking back control of the streets of London. Well, not this morning, I can tell you, when it seemed most of Westminster was closed at 7 o'clock this morning. Why? I have no idea. And indeed, as we speak, there are quite a lot of protesters gathering in Trafalgar Square. But I made the point, rather than just protesting, why don't people do positive things like go out and plant trees? And I pushed this point very, very hard. So, Mary, I was really thrilled to get your message, where you say, I run my own small business, and due to your comments about tree planting, I'm donating 10% of my takings in October to the Woodland Trust. Already this week, we funded 25 new trees. Mary, well done. And if we had a global forestation programme, what a good, sensible thing that would be. Our woodlands in this country are down to a fraction of what they were a few centuries ago. Stop protesting in the streets and clogging up London. Go out and plant some trees, Extinction Rebellion. But I bet none of them will. Hey, never mind. Let's get on to your messages. I get from Tim on Twitter. Surely, once we've left, we can put laws in place to better protect workers' rights, jobs, etc. I just don't know how all of this will be lost if we leave. I'm confused. Tim, it's a group of politicians who believe we are not capable of running our own affairs or governing our own country or looking after workers or having sensible animal rights laws. And it's just extraordinary that they think Europe should do all of this for us. And that includes Theresa May, who history is not going to treat kindly, believe you me. Nigel, I've honestly given up on the whole thing. Britain does not want out of the customs union and single market. We'll be talking about this for a generation. Well, actually, I'm not so sure that's right. There's still a majority think Brexit should be delivered, and everybody in that Brexit debate, all the leading players on both sides said we'd be leaving the single market and the customs union. Ian, who sends this SMS from a train, says, if this deal went to a second referendum, as a Brexiteer, I would be campaigning for Remain. No more EU treaties. And Ian, I have to say, if we did finish up at the end of this week, at the end of Saturday, with a second referendum being passed and a choice between this treaty or the existing treaty, it would be the greatest democratic outrage in the history of our country. And Ian, I won't be campaigning for Remain, but I won't be voting. I simply wouldn't take part in a second referendum if there was not a clear leave option. And I think many millions of people feel like that. I would suggest so many millions of people feel like that in fact so few would turn out, the thing would be invalid. If we are forced to a second referendum, there has to be a clear leave option of that, I've no doubt. Now, Leslie spotted something. Why were Dominic Grieve and Vince Cable in Brussels for talks today? Now, are they in cahoots, she says, to impose a second referendum? I wouldn't use as nice a word as cahoots, Leslie. I'd use collusion. And it wasn't just the two of them. David Lammy was on the same Eurostar as well. And, of course, they're working with Brussels. They are doing their best to say, don't give Boris what he wants, make it as difficult for him as he can, and allow us in this circumstance to try and force through a second referendum. What Grieve and Cable won't have got today, they will not have got the European Union to explicitly state that there has to be an extension and there has to be a second referendum, because I think that Juncker and others are too clever for that. They know that if a second referendum was seen to have been imposed by the European Commission, people would go absolutely bonkers in this country. Back to your calls, going to Eastbourne to speak to John. Good evening, John.
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. Well, I would just like to say it's now 40 plus years ago that a failed Tory Prime Minister took us into the EU membership, and obviously we've been paying billions of pounds into it ever since. And now we're hoping that this embattled Prime Minister we've got, Boris Johnson, can actually get us out of this mess. So whether he can do it or not, obviously we're going to know come the 31st of October. Personally, I don't think he will. I mean, I think that the deal he's going to try and come up with, like you said, he's probably going to fall well short of what we actually need. So, only time will tell. But after the 31st of this month, we'll know if Boris Johnson's up to the job or not, won't we?
Well, he's certainly put his reputation on the line, John, hasn't he, by saying, we will leave on the 31st of October, do or die, come what may. I'll die in a ditch rather than extend. So he's upped the stakes on this, John, hasn't he?
Well, I hope the man does come up with it, because obviously at this present time he's any confirmed Brexiteer. He is our only chance at the moment. He may well fall on his sword after the 31st of October. The only thing I'd say, Nigel, every single time we see poor old Boris Johnson getting out of official car outside number 10, he's always looking so ungainly. He's always got his shirts always hanging out the back of his trousers. He doesn't really look the part, does he? But obviously we're still hoping the man can come up trumps. And if he doesn't, well, what will happen after that? Obviously, it'll be a different ball game after the 31st of March.
John, people won't care if he's scruffy if he was seen to have got us a good Brexit. But I'm afraid what he's doing is putting lipstick on a pig. He's taking Mrs May's dreadful treaty and trying to amend it slightly. It's not going to work in my view, John. Thank you for your call. Boris, you'd best jump in that ditch if we don't leave on the 31st, I get from Roy. Lisa says, do they really think the words crashing out still works? Actually, Lisa, I've noticed a lot more people now talking about it as a clean break Brexit, so you pays your money and takes your choice. Going to Chorley to speak to Darren, who's a new caller. Good evening, Darren.
Hi, Nigel. How are you doing?
Doing all right. So what do you want to see, Darren? Come on, tell us.
Well, I want you to make me a promise after I've said what I'm going to say.
Say what you're going to say, and then I'll give it a go. All right?
Okay. I don't want Boris to get a deal. I want there to be an extension, which will force a general election, which means that then you can stand you and your Brexit party can stand with just one mandate: leave the EU without a deal.
Mm-hmm.
The Supreme Court, have set a precedent by interfering in politics already.
Mm-hmm.
So surely, if you get elected as Prime Minister, as leader of the Brexit party, you can just put a bill through Parliament.
Well, equally,
Darren,
if Jo Swinson became the Prime Minister because the Liberal Democrats won a majority, she would then just revoke Article 50.
Right, Nigel, be realistic. Who's gonna win a general election? You or Jo Swinson? Come on.
Well, I think at the moment, Darren, outright, probably it's very difficult for anyone to win the general election. But I don't know.
The Brexit Party will win hands down in a general election.
Well, I tell you what, Darren, you get a good shade of odds of that from the bookmaker. That I can promise you. You wanted to ask me something.
My money's on the Brexit Party.
All right, okay, good stuff, Darren. Thank you. Well, there's an opinion there. As I say, if that's what you think, you get very good odds on that. Colin is a new caller from Rugby. Hello, Colin.
Hi, Nigel. I don't think that Boris is going to get a good deal for us. I think that you're right that we are going to get something slightly massaged. We're going to get things in there that we find very, very unpalatable, like being stuffed with the European Court of Justice and things like having to participate in foreign aid and level playing field regulations, all the rest of it, none of which is Brexit properly. I mean, we have a very strong hand in a no-deal Brexit. We've got a huge imbalance of trade with the EU.
I agree with you.
I mean, we could, once we're outside the EU, we can use state aid to aid Northern Ireland and make everything cheaper in Northern Ireland. Then there's absolutely no point in smuggling anything north. It'll all be going south.
Is Boris Johnson, Colin, is Boris Johnson selling out on Northern Ireland and many other things?
I think there is a very good likelihood that he will not deliver a good solution for Northern Ireland.
No, I tell you what, Colin, stay with me. I'm going to play you what Boris Johnson said to the DUP annual conference in 2018. Have a listen to this.
We genuinely wanted to do free trade deals. If we wanted to cut tariffs on, as we should, by the way, on food to make food cheaper for our people, from sub-Saharan Africa or whatever. If we wanted to vary our regulation, then we would have to leave Northern Ireland behind as an economic semi-colony of the EU. And we would be damaging the fabric of the Union with regulatory checks and even customs controls between Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Well, that would never do, would it?
Of those extra regulatory checks down the Irish Sea that are already envisaged in the withdrawal agreement. Now, I have to tell you, no British Conservative government could or should sign up to any such arrangement.
I mean, Colin, did you hear that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And now that's exactly what he's proposing, isn't it?
That's right. There are some things where it is sensible from a scientific point of view to do checks between UK mainland and Northern Ireland. That's the phytosanitary sort of checks that you need on live animals and seeds and things. Yeah. Because you can't easily separate the island of Ireland in terms of its landmass, but and it's possibly a good idea to look at some X-raying of trucks at the ports, just to make sure that what's on the paperwork is actually in the truck.
As we do with Chinese business and American business and all sorts of other things. Yeah, but I mean, Colin, he's gone back on his word to these people. He is putting a regulatory and tariff border down the North Sea, isn't he, effectively?
It's
Sorry, not the North Sea, the Irish Sea. The Irish Sea.
The Irish Sea is not acceptable. And as for the fifth columnists that have been to Brussels today, I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, these people do not believe in the UK. All they believe in is their own.
I will give you. I mean, Colin, you've used some strong language there about them, and I have a bit earlier too. I'll give you their defence. Their defence is they're standing up for the national interest, which is best served being part of the European club. Colin, thank you for your thoughts and calls. And Boris, you heard Jacob Rees-Mogg at the weekend saying that he would eat his own words. Well, Boris is certainly eating his own words. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:47, and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. Me on SMS. I have faith in Boris. He will do the job. Well, good luck with that, Barry. Maybe he will. Who knows? And on Twitter, Nigel Farage, only you and your thick cult followers use clean break Brexit because you are morons. That's really absolutely about right for, I think, a sort of active, aggressive Remainer, just to sink to insults the whole time. But hey, we're used to it. You may have seen the polling at the weekend that asked people what they'd like to see. And it was interesting. 33% wanted us to remain in all circumstances, 43% wanted a clean break Brexit, and about 12% wanted a new EU treaty. So whichever way you cut it, if people who want a clean break Brexit are morons, there's a heck of a lot of them. So we'll have to see. Sarah says, if this deal is similar to Theresa May's, I would prefer an extension to try and get a better deal or find some way of leaving with a clean break. Sarah, I think the only way we ever get a clean break is after a general election. I don't see any other way that this Parliament will allow it. Aziz is a new caller from Staines. Good evening, Aziz.
Nigel, how are you?
Hello,
how are you?
I'm very well indeed.
Talking to you.
Well, pleasure to have you on, Aziz. Now, big summit tomorrow. Do you think Boris Johnson should sign up to anything, disagree if it's too bad, or perhaps even get up and walk out if they're insulting to him?
Right, well, before I go there, I'll talk about that in a second. This is Aziz. I call myself an English Muslim.
Okay.
I love to call myself a British Muslim, which is fine, but I call myself an English Muslim, which I love England. I've grown up in England, and my children are all English, so I am a British and English Muslim.
Well, I'm delighted to hear it.
Thank you. Right, so I always follow you, I always like you, and I am most of your points I'm with you.
Uh-huh.
Yes, I am a leaver. Mm-hmm. And I don't have any problem with leaving. But I just wanted to find out what is your position? You are a leaver. So what do you want? Why we're still arguing with the leave?
Aziz, I am a leaver. You're absolutely right. And I did not spend 25 years campaigning to leave the EU treaties to sign up to another EU treaty that does not guarantee us anything other than years of acrimony and misery. I have always wanted, Aziz, a genuine free trade agreement with our European neighbours. The only way we're going to get that is to have a clean break first and negotiate with them on equal terms. Aziz, that's what I want to see.
Exactly. I love this. The thing is, when we all talked about leaving the EU 5 years ago, this has started. 6 years ago, this started. Of course, we've ended up 3 years ago. We never been told that there will be, if you want to leave, there will be these kind of concerns, these kind of things, these kind of negotiations, deal, no deal, and all this. We just wanted to leave.
I know.
And I believe in the United Kingdom. I believe the United Kingdom is a powerful country. I believe the United Kingdom could do everything on its own. We didn't have any of these concerns before. What is all these camps about now to talk about? Do we have a deal? We don't have a deal. I just want to leave, and I'm happy to leave without the deal.
Aziz, you put the point beautifully. Thank you for your call, your kind words and your enthusiasm. Adrian from Louth says to me, Nigel, I'm very apprehensive if the deal doesn't give us the option to trade with the rest of the world. One of the points in the political declaration was Article 23, which said any future trade deal would be based on the current customs arrangement. So clever old Barnier wanted to keep us stuck inside the customs union, wanted to stop us being able to negotiate our own trade deals. And I think senior British civil service and political figures colluded with that. Boris said he wants that changed, and we'll find out at some point just how much change there is. Selina is calling from the Isle of Wight. Good evening, Selina.
Hi, Nigel. Lovely to speak to you again. You all right?
Yes, I remember you coming on last time. Nice to speak to you. What would you like to see tomorrow?
Well, I'd like to say you weren't wrong when you said no more Mr. Nice Guy. I've been watching you and I've seen the lion come out.
Okay, fine.
I thought, he ain't messing no more jokes. So I was like, I really respect that. You've done a fantastic job.
Well, that's
Keep up the
very,
good work.
very sweet of you. So, I mean, do you think Boris can get something tomorrow that would be acceptable to Brexiteers?
If going to get Parliament, the best deal. Well, not going to get through. So I think it's all a waste of time. I do think it's going to go through. So.
No, I don't. I think whatever he does, Parliament is not going to vote for it, Selina, because I think it'll be so bad. No. I think it'll be so similar to Theresa May's treaty that I'm with you. I don't think it'll get through. Which, and I mean, I never thought I'd say this, but actually, of the options on the table, if a clean break's been taken out by the Benn Act, if the choice is between that, an awful new treaty, or an extension into which we might have a general election, I'll go for the extension. Selina, rotten phone line. Make sure next time it's better. Tom is a new caller from Southampton. Good evening, Tom.
Good evening, Nigel. Thanks for having me on.
Not a bit.
Just quickly, I'd like to say thank you to you and all the hard work you and UKIP have done. I think if it wasn't for you, we probably wouldn't have had a referendum in the first place.
Well, that's kind of you. But what about the EU summit tomorrow, Tom?
Well, I think that Boris's hands are tied. I mean, I like to think he's trying to do the best he can, but I mean, what's he doing taking those Ramonas over to Brussels with him?
Oh, I don't think the fact Vince Cable was on Eurostar had anything to do with Boris, I can promise you. I think they're going of their own will, and they've been working with the other side all through this. Tom, time is desperately short, and I'm sorry about that. But do you think...
Can I just say one thing, Nigel?
Yeah, go on.
Well, technically, we're still under... EU law takes primacy over UK law.
It does.
And until we leave, Article 50 says we can leave with or without a deal. So technically, the Benn Act doesn't stand.
Well, Tom, you're right. I understand that. I've wondered whether that was the trick, the sort of trump card that Boris had up his sleeve, but I don't think it is. Tom, thank you. I'm sorry it was short. It's a fair point that Tom makes. And by the way, leaving with or without a deal, Article 50, 498 members of Parliament voted for that, but a lot of them seem to have forgotten it. I'm off to Brussels very, very early tomorrow morning. I'll be live with you from 6 UK time tomorrow night. We may know a lot more. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick, but up next...